Hello friends and welcome to a shot of code. Today we're going to be looking at promises. Now promises are a way of dealing with asynchronous tasks without all the problems associated with standard callbacks. They also give you a nice little syntax of .then and .catch, but that's not the main reason for using them. Now, I've done a previous video describing the internals of a promise using something called a thunk. Worth checking that out here if you're interested to see how that works. So, what does a promise offer us over callbacks? Well, first of all, they're chainable, which should reduce the callback hell of this Christmas tree syntax where you get a big triangle of code coming down. The error handling is easier and more concise. We can have a .catch for all of our code rather than having to write individual error handlers. They are time independent, so at the time of calling a method that returns a promise, we don't need to have our callback function available there and then. We can simply define that later on and grab the result at that time. Promises also return just a single result. You'll only ever get called back with a success or failure, unlike callbacks where you could potentially have multiple success calls coming in. Okay, I've got Visual Studio open here and we're going to have a look at a callback and these corresponding promise implementation of it as well. So I'm just going to create in callback here a very simple sleep function that takes a callback as a parameter, and then we'll simulate some processing with just a timeout. So a process that takes 5 seconds to complete, say. I'll put that in there now before I forget. And then once it completes, we will just return by calling the passed in callback function done sleeping. So if we just then call sleep, we can pass in a callback function, and we can do it in line with an arrow function here if you like. And in here we will then just console.log our result. So I just need to have that there. So we pass in this function, this arrow function gets passed into sleep as callback, and then we call callback with the parameter done sleeping, so that comes back in with results there. Now let's, just to show how and when things are happening, let's put a console log in here, and that we're starting sleep. And then down here we'll say console.log all done, like so. Okay, so if I run callback.js here, we can see we get starting sleep and then all done. So our code has completed apart from our callback. So the process is still running, and then we get done sleeping here, which is when this timeout completed, and we get our console.log in here. Okay, now what would this look like with promises? Well, let's create a function sleep. Now we don't need to pass anything into this function because we will now return a new promise. Now this promise accepts a function that takes two parameters. We need a resolve and a reject. Now the promise will always call one of those and only one of those once. Right, so in here let's do the same again, console.log starting sleep. And we'll have our set time out, which will do 5 seconds again, and in there. Now, our callback in this case is one of these passed in functions. We're going to call resolve or reject. So let's call resolve and say done sleeping. Now, to call a function that uses promises, we call sleep, but we don't pass in anything in today. You can see we're not passing any parameters here. But because we get returned this promise, we can then use that returned promise, and promise has a method called then, and in there we get our result. So I can then just console.log our result, and let's have a similar console log all done. Okay, so let's try that one in here. Promise. So starting sleep all done. Okay, so we're down here. We've called sleep and we're just waiting for sleep to complete, and then we get done sleeping here, which is because of our resolve call within our promise there. So not too much difference there. Certainly there's it's a standard of promise. The callbacks here, everyone adheres to a common technique, but there's no actual standard. You don't know how many times this is going to get called. We could have callback here called twice if we wanted. So let's run this one again. Starting sleep all done, and then let's wait for our sleep to complete. Okay, done sleeping twice. If you've got some financial transaction in here, and on completion you're moving money, you're going to be doing it twice. So you're relying on the process you call to only call you back once, which in your code is fine, but if you're calling a third-party library, you can't be certain that is the case. Now with promises, we're only ever going to get the resolve or reject called once. Let's put two resolves in there. As you can see, so we've called sleep, we've got our starting sleep coming out, and then we get a single done sleeping. So it doesn't matter how many times you call resolve in a promise, it's only ever going to get sent back to the caller once, compared to you could have as many as you want in there for just a basic callback. Right, so let's look now at the kind of Christmas tree problem, which promises resolve. It's not the main reason. A lot of commentary out there says that this is one of the main benefits of promises. It's nice, but the other features of promises are much more important. Particularly this only calling back once approach, and the easier error handling, and those things I mentioned at the start of the video. Right, so let's have another function in here called run, and I'm just going to copy this function actually and rename it run, and we'll get rid of our double callback and say, okay, starting run and done running, and 5 seconds on that again. Now if run depends on sleep, then we need to call run from within the callback of sleep. So we'd have run in here, and we'd pass in, we'd get our result back, and in there do console.log result. And then if we wanted to then have another sleep after our run, then we need to do the same again. So within the callback from run, we call sleep, we'd get the callback called, and we'd log that out like so. And again, if you want to do run again, then you need to do it in here to ensure that sleep has happened. So we call run, get the result back, and console.log it out. Okay, so you can see what's happening, and the code is slowly moving out, and pretty hard to read. And if we add error handling into this as well, it gets even harder, because on each one of these we've got to handle the error individually. Each of these callbacks, if we're doing error handling, would actually have an error on it here, and we would say if error, and then handle error in there, and we'd have to do that on each one of these. I'm not going to put that in there because it really is unreadable, and but that is certainly one of the problems with standard callbacks as well. So let's just run that one in here. Oh, I'll put an error in. I need to call it run, obviously. Okay, so every 5 seconds we've done a sleeping, so we're starting our run, and when we've done our run, we start sleeping, and then when we've done our sleep, we start another run, and that should just carry on till the end, and that's all completed. So that certainly works, but not the nicest code to look at. Now, what would this look like with promises? So let's do the same thing. We'll take sleep, and we'll just take a copy of that there. And remember to rename it to run, and then we'll do starting run and done running, and we don't want the double call anymore. Not that it would be a problem, but we'll take it out. Right, now, so when we do this with promises, similar thing, when our sleep completes, we want to start our run, but we can actually return the result of run, which is a promise. And that means we can call the method then on that return, and we can come out from inside of here, which means we're not going to get this nesting. So we do then result, and we could say console log result, and then after our run we can do the same again. We can return a sleep this time, and that means we can call dot then down here, and just console that like so. So rather than getting this nesting, we can see they're going just in sequence down the page, so it's easier to read for sure. So let me run that one, and we should see just similar. Once we've done our sleep, we will get our run. So we started our run, and once that, we'll do another sleep. And then once that sleep completes, we're done sleeping. So there you go. Now, in terms of the error handling as well, in here we had to handle on each one, but with promises, we can simply add a catch on here that's going to get an error that occurs in any of these. Like so there. So that is one of the major benefits there. Much easier for your error handling. Okay, right, now, so this was processing tasks sequentially when they're dependent on one another. What if we wanted to kick all the tasks off at the same time? Now that wouldn't then be a nesting approach here. We would simply be we do it on the normal callbacks. We could do a sleep, and we can do a run. And now these will now kick off in parallel, so that this is the reason for callbacks. We don't block on these asynchronous calls. So if we say we're going to sleep for 8 seconds, then we would expect our run to complete first, even though we're calling run second there. So let's clear this here and run that one. So we're starting sleep and starting our run, and our main thread is exited. We've all done. Then we get our callback for done running, and then we get done sleeping afterwards. Now, just the same really in promise world for this. If I just go back to sleep, and then I'll take out the run here. So if I just grab a copy of sleep and we call run, then we should see very similar. Let's put again 8 seconds for the sleep. So started both of the processes. You know, we're not dependent on sleep finishing before we run, so we want to know when run finishes, even if it's earlier. And it did. We had done running and then done sleeping after 8 seconds. One thing you can do in promises as well, if you want to wait for a group of functions to all finish at the same before processing, we can use something called promise.all. So they're kind of dependent on each other, but only that they've all completed. So if we do promise.all, we can actually just pass in an array here. So I can call sleep and run like so. And promise.all returns a promise. So we can do dot then on it like this. And what we should see now is that we wait until they're both completed. So it's going to take 8 seconds, and then they're both going to come out at the same time now. Okay, so there you go. You know, if I put this down to 1 second and 5, it's still going to wait the 5 seconds because we're saying we want all of these promises to be completed before we process the callback function. Okay, one other thing that we talked about earlier in the intro was time independent. Now, this refers to when we handle the result of our promise call, our call to some method, some asynchronous method. With callbacks, we have to provide, so say on this sleep callback, we have to provide the function here when we make the sleep call. We can't defer it or anything. It's got to be implemented there and then. And when that gets called is when the callback calls it. We have no control over that. Now, this is not the same with promises. If I call sleep, and rather than calling .then, the .then method on the promise, if I just store that promise, then I can now use that whenever I want. I could be doing other things. So let's say console.log doing other stuff, and then I decide, right, now I want to handle my promise. I can then take sleep promise and simply call on the method there. Let's have result. So you can picture various other code being run here. It's just showing that you can separate out this this handling of when you decide to handle it. So, you know, when we do this, the promise could already resolve. The result could already be there, and it could have been there for a while, but we might not want to handle it yet. So we handle the result when we want. If it's there, we'll handle it then. If it's still not there, we'll get this callback when it does eventually complete. As I mentioned earlier, we go over that a bit more in the thunk video that I referenced earlier. Okay, so there you go, and we just get our done sleeping still coming out there at the end. Okay, so there you go. There's an overview of promises versus callbacks. I hope that was useful. If you like these videos, feel free to click on that subscribe button at the end of the video. See you next time. Bye.